Welcome to Voices United, a congregational song podcast. I am your host, Benjamin Brody, and today I am privileged to spend time with David Bailey, Executive Director of Arrabon, a ministry that seeks to equip church leaders for the work of racial reconciliation and justice. David and I met in July 2018 in St. Louis at the annual conference of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. Welcome, David. It's great to have you. Great to have you here today, and so good to get to hear you speak again this morning.
So glad to be here and be with you all.
Oh, thanks. I wonder if you could share first with us, what are your earliest memories of congregational singing?
Oh, man, my earliest memory of congregational singing. So the first church I was a part of was actually a storefront church. And when you hear storefront church, you kind of think Pentecostal kind of, but it actually was quite interesting. It was kind of some black middle-class professionals like nurses, teachers. That was at a storefront church that was kind of charismatic, and then and so we would sing actually out of hymnals. The lady that played the piano couldn't play by ear; she could only read. She grew up in a United Methodist church in South Carolina, and so it was all black folks. And then when I was about 8, we started to connect with another church that was actually in a housing project, and they had a more Pentecostal kind of background in the housing projects. And so that church merged together, and that really became a really formative space. I started tinkering around on the piano around 8, and I was really starting to play around 11, like as a regular church musician. It was in a black church context where there's apprenticing type of model.
So no formal lessons, but
I took about 8 lessons when I was about 8, and then my music teacher moved away, and it was like $8 a lesson kind of thing with my neighbor. So then at 11, I started middle school band playing saxophone. But then from there, I just started picking up instruments and playing.
That's great. It strikes me that's at least as I've observed in some churches, that's such a rich method of training up musicians where, even young kids are jumping in and playing along or sitting in a rehearsal. And I think there's a lot we can...
It's a gift that keeps on giving, and I think, when I was on staff at a predominantly white church, that was something new I kind of brought into it. And unfortunately, it's something that they left because then they wanted... they were so concerned about their choir, or they want to have a youth band, but really literally, if a kid wants to play drums, we'll just sit next to the drummer after service, and then hey, how do you do this thing? And the keyboard tell you know how to do stuff, and so it's a gift that keeps on giving. I think every church needs to have definitely a worship pastor, like somebody that's shepherding artists. I think have a music director that can arrange things, and even a vocal director that can arrange things. But you definitely need to have music education, as a key component of it.
Well, and there's so much emphasis today on intergenerational in worship, and this seems like a primary sort of no-brainer intergenerational way to do music, where younger musicians are being mentored by older musicians, and
totally.
And probably the other way as well, where older musicians that may not know how to play in newer forms are learning that from the younger musicians.
I mean, part of the deal is just so I had this church formation, but I just have always just loved older music. I can't tell you what's out on the radio right now, but I could tell you about some movies from the 60s and 70s, and I just feel like that's a golden era of music for me. One of the two artists that I really love the most was Quincy Jones and Miles Davis. And the reason why their longevity and their career was, Quincy Jones, he produced Michael Jackson, but he was 50 years old when Thriller came out, right? And Michael Jackson was in his 20s. And so, but Quincy Jones was 20, maybe it might be 19, 20 years old when he got on with Charlie Parker, and he was 25 when he was Dizzy Gillespie's music director when Dizzy Gillespie did a European tour. And so, he had like an apprenticing kind of model, and then he ended up doing the same thing. And then people always like talk about Michael Jackson. I agree with saying Michael Jackson was great. Yeah. He was a genius.
Yeah.
But the most amount of albums he sold was with Quincy Jones.
Yeah.
Miles Davis ended up picking up with Charlie Parker. Quincy Jones did some other stuff, but Miles Davis, when he was 19, was with Charlie Parker when him and Dizzy Gillespie split. And but then by the time he did the What's Going On album, he had younger musicians. Then he had the sextet with like Herbie Hancock, and I mean, he even was doing rap before he died. Because he just was like, I'm going to always stick with the 20-somethings, and just try to. And I think that's what we have to do because the relationship is symbiotic on both ways.
Oh, that's great. Tell us a little about your faith journey.
Man, my faith journey. I grew up in a Christian household. My parents came. My dad came. I mean, he grew up in like a Baptist. I mean, even a black atheist a Baptist. Like, so it's just you just have like. It's just faith part of the black culture, but he really became like a committed, like kind of Christian oriented in the way he lived his life, and it's, I think kind of mid-30s. He really took his faith seriously. My parents took his faith really seriously. Came to faith through actually the 700 Club.
Oh, really?
And so I was really shaped by a lot of the kind of like fundamentalist conservative type of activity. What was really good about that is a lot of people have a lot of baggage in that area for a lot of good reasons. But our parents, their walk was way better than their talk. They were very like generous people. They were people who, even though we lived in the suburbs, we went to church in the inner city and really did a lot of empowerment. And around 2010, I went to the Christian Community Development Association conference with Dr. John Perkins. And I was telling my parents about, hey, have you heard about this thing called CCDA, Christian Community Development Association? And my dad was like, I thought that's what you call being a Christian. And so that was the kind of faith I grew up in and like shaped in a lot of intersection in that area. So that's kind of what that journey was like. When I was 8, I was slow to read. So my dad figured out, well, I'll get him an 8-year-old kind of reading level Bible. But what I have to do is read 2 chapters of Old Testament, 2 chapters of New Testament, Proverbs and Psalms every day. So 6 chapters of the Bible. And I grew up in one of those old school households where you just do what your parents do and don't like question it. Yeah. But that's kind of old. I was like, man, Dad, I think that might have been a lot for us. But it gave me a love for the Word and Scriptures and just a familiarity with it. And so, for the last 30 years, I basically have read through Proverbs once a month, and it's really shaped and formed my life, so.
Isn't that great how that discipline that the purpose of it was really, I'm sure your parents had in mind this sort of secondary spiritual purpose, but really to help you read, and yet that habit that you formed then has stayed with you.
Stayed with me, man. It's been really great. It's really good. Great. I'm very grateful.
My parents were, we went to a church where we had really long sermons, like hour-long sermons every Sunday. And I remember at one point, telling my parents, why, I got to have something else to do during this. I was 7 or 8. And so they said, well, you can read your Bible. That's the only thing you can do. So I had this kind of comic book sort of Bible, but it was mostly there. And I learned so much of the Bible reading through those sermons, during those Sundays.
That's good.
All right. Well, I want to turn to some of what you're talking about today. Could you unpack the word reconciliation?
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about that in a session here at the conference, and how should we think about or use this term reconciliation?
Yeah. So a lot of times in reconciliation, particularly as it relates to like a relationship, there's an idea that something was broken, but even more so that like folks were like equal. Then there was some mutuality or some kind of synergy going on. It was broken. You're trying to reconcile it and mend it back together. In the racial social theory space, and people that just students of history, a lot of people don't like that word reconciliation, and the reason why is because white Europeans, Africans, and natives were never equal together in relationships and equality. So they say the best that you could do is have conciliation.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. I mean, it's true. Like that's just historical fact. But the reason why we in Arrabon really commit to use the word reconciliation is because we use it as a theological term that is saying that the world was whole, then it got broken, and God's bringing and mending it back together. So that's what we're like, what we're using the word. And then when you get into for the Christian, it's never like, oh, what, the world's broken? But it's really like, what are the details? And when you get into the American narrative details, you realize it's been broken from the very beginning. And we haven't fully healed from that. And God's calling us to live into some of that that process of mending.
That reconciliation, it seems like, as you're speaking, it's a reconciling to God as much as it is to each other.
Yeah,
it's bringing it back a step from relationships to bigger.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you understand the Christian narrative, God, humanity, and the land, and when I say the land, it means the animals and everything. I mean, those things are so interconnected in ways that God is done, and there has been kind of colonial Western imperialism that has separated a lot of these things, and we gotta understand, like, all theology is historically and culturally influenced, and so there's a reason why we've inherited holes in our theology as related to like a true vision of creation, fall, redemption, restoration. And there's a reason why we've only focused on the spiritual side of fall and redemption, and spiritualized it, but haven't really dealt with the full humanity of what does it mean to be reconciled with God, to one another, and the land of which we were called to steward, for not for only just for the stewardship's sake, but even for our own flourishing.
Yeah. No, that's good. Many are familiar with the quote that I think is attributed to Martin Luther King Jr., that 11 a.m. Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. You've been in the trenches of working to desegregate worship. What wisdom do you have to share from your experience?
Yeah. I intuitively started to get into, quote-unquote, desegregating worship, or working on church desegregation through worship. Some of it had to do with being a musician, but then I also, pretty much being a music producer, and that's kind of really what my skills were. It was in music production. When you're a music producer, you're pretty much a cultural anthropologist. Or music director, you're pretty much a cultural anthropologist. And the way I explain that is that, when I used to play at the country club, what makes somebody dance at the country club is one thing. What makes somebody dance at the Black Pentecostal church is another thing. And what makes the Presbyterian sway, that's all cultural anthropology.
Yeah.
And so you intuitively know and pick that stuff up. But then, when I'm on the bandstand, or if I'm thinking about a record and producing a record, thinking about demographic of the people, the audience, the artists, the executive producer, somebody's paying for this, all of these dynamics, that's all cultural anthropology and understanding sociology and psychology of how people work. I realized that a lot of pastors didn't apply those same principles. Some of the pastors if they were evangelists, they're really good evangelists, or if they used to be missionaries overseas. But I realized that we all need those skills. Like, a lot of people just say, I'm just going to preach, I'm just going to sing songs and do the ministry and let the Holy Spirit do whatever the Holy Spirit does. And it's like, yeah, but you just didn't when you went to go plant the church, you just didn't say, I'm going to see what the Holy Spirit does.
Yeah.
You actually did some demographic studies. You talk to people about a vision and make sure you could communicate to those people about the vision in ways that they would want to get involved with your church plant. And so, that's all anthropological, right? That's all sociological. And so it started to kind of apply some of those principles, and I really saw that culture was really shaped through worship. I originally was thinking music. Then as I got introduced to the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship, I learned more about liturgy and just began to translate a lot more things and just kind of got more categories. And when we were involved with our church, well, we intuitively kind of knew this, but then James K.H. Smith in his book, Desiring the Kingdom, says, like, what you practice on a regular basis, your liturgy, shapes your worship. And so for us, it's not a issue of, I mean, it's true that, like, what you do in worship shapes your imagination of the kingdom, but it's also about, like, who you do your worship with shapes your imagination of the kingdom. Yeah. And so we basically been kind of going after that and really trying to help folks in that area. I think the last thing I would say, just for the moment, would be around 3 years ago, I stopped performing for a few reasons. One was just I just couldn't keep up with the level of professionalism I used to be a Pleiad and having to run an organization and speaking and traveling. But then I also realized that, like, when you do music really well, people don't understand oftentimes what's going on underneath. And it was really hard. Like, folks were like, oh man, what we got to do is get a band like Urban Doxology. You know, that's what we really need. And it's like, no, like, what you see with Urban Doxology is 8 years of discipleship. You know, you see incarnational pastoral ministry, you know, and the magic trick just isn't necessarily if I do the right songs or in the music. I do think there's something special about music and there's something special about worship, but it's really about culture making and with collaboration and community through the lens of reconciliation and like really apprenticing and helping to make some disciples in this area. That's what happens. So it's like, it's really cool at this stage of the ministry, Urban Doxology ministers all around the country, and they're doing like really amazing stuff ministry-wise, both as a group, but then in their own personal lives and ministry. It's great to see them now in their 30s and, you know, folks that were alumni. And then now they're training and they're running the internship of young people, you know, between 18 to 25 now, when they used to be that, you know, 8 years ago. So that's a really exciting and cool thing to see.
It seems like a lot of churches tackling some of these questions perhaps are tempted to come at them in the same sort of failed way that many did the sort of traditional contemporary worship wars, 20 years ago, where they said, oh, we need to get more people. We just need to have a contemporary service, then they'll come. And they realized, oh, maybe there are some bigger issues here that we need to deal with. It's not just having a certain style of music or having a certain, and it seems like maybe there are some parallels here.
That's the thing. I think, like, I just realized I probably need to devote a little more time to try to help people think through some of those issues, you know, and to help equip churches and Christian communities to think that, whether nonprofits or churches, to think through some of the details of that.
There's been a lot of recent discussion and acknowledgement of the ways that race, gender, education, among other factors, privilege some people over others. How does this play out in worship?
I mean, it's crazy that James talked about this 2,000 years ago, right? I mean, he was like, hey, when you got a poor brother and sister comes in, and then you got a rich brother and sister that comes in, and you pull out the red carpet. It's crazy that Paul, through communion, is like, well, some of y'all get there early. You may, you know, because you're in charge of your own schedule. I mean, I don't know what the total context of it was, but I imagine it's like y'all got this love feast, this communion table, and some of y'all are in charge of your own schedule because you make a certain amount of money, or you have a professional white-collar job, and then you get there early, you eat all the food up. And other folks who really need the money because, you know, they're hourly workers, or they get off when their boss says they get off. And by the time they get there, there's no food left, you know? It's issues of justice in class. And God's like, man, this should be so with my people, you know? So that's what people are talking about when they talk about equity now, whether it's racial equity or accessibility to people with different socioeconomic challenges. I think that's what folks are talking about, but the scriptures have been talking about it for years, you know. God's people were formed in oppression, you know. And I think when we don't read the Bible through that lens, that in Exodus, you know, that God heard the cry of the oppressed, and he began to form the people out there, and he said, "Hey, basically it's like I allowed you to be formed. You could have been formed just out of nice, privileged people, but I didn't. I formed you out of slavery, so you can remember what it's like to be an immigrant. That you can like what it's like to be economically vulnerable, and so I think when we forget that, then we can make God out to be something that He's not, and make the Bible out to something that is not."
Yeah, thank you. A major focus of your work has been helping individuals write new songs for the church. What songs are we not singing? And what do you look for in a new song, or what do you encourage? How do you nurture that creation of new songs?
Well, one thing I'll say is, like, I'll kind of nuance what we're doing. We're taking individuals and trying to help them to write collaboratively, to bring their full selves into it, whether they're privileged or they're under-resourced, they're economically privileged or economically vulnerable, whether they're the same race and ethnicity, but we really try to bring diversity together, like work together, different cultural backgrounds. And so what we're looking for is, we try to say, like, hey, we're not writing something that's already been written, we're not writing like what I call Jesus or Boyfriend songs, that, I like R&B, but I'd rather R&B to be real R&B and not like, love songs. But, and I do think there's a space for love and intimacy with God that I think is there. But it's like, man, people are already writing that, Let's write something new. I think Old Testament, like, just pick anything in the Old Testament other than the, like, classic songs, you know?
Yeah.
But, like, get into the narratives of the Old Testament, which we really encourage them to do that. If you talk about grace, then it's like, don't look at Romans for grace. Look at Abraham for grace. And look at Jacob for grace. And what is it like to wrestle with God, So those are things that we look for. We try to look at the themes that we have in our church, and we kind of go from there and say, like, hey, what we feel like the Spirit's leading us in as a church, and then we have the interns, like, study texts along that line. And then we try to look for texts that aren't common, and then kind of go from there.
I love that focus on collaboration, because it seems to me that's one way, perhaps, to combat privilege.
Yeah.
Because if you're living with privilege, you may have a sense that you can do it all yourself.
Yeah.
And that forcing to collaborate causes you to realize, no, I need others, people with other backgrounds, people with other different gifts than I have, people with, I need others to be able to create.
Yeah.
What can churches do to encourage the creation of songs for worship?
I mean, I think the one thing is prioritize it economically. I think really commissioning it. And I think there's a space where, then the trade-offs. I think churches should definitely commission artists and give artists room to make stuff, just to make things as artists. I think we need to have songs that aren't related to worship, but have artists to do that. I think that's really good mission and worship budget, because worship and mission go hand in hand. Where worship ends, mission begins. Where mission ends, worship begins. I think that might be John Piper or something like that. But I want to say another thing is just actually commission the work, and like you could. I think there's a place to commission artists to just like, hey, can you write this worship song? I think there's another space to commission artists to like work together collaboratively, with a goal in mind, a short, like some kind of like decent amount of short-term goal to make, and for us we do the 8-week internship and get them write as many songs as possible, but then hone it down to 12 to 14 but they might write 40 to 50 tunes, and we say, like, hey, you just gotta write 10 bad songs or average songs before you get one really good one. So we don't know we don't know if it's gonna be the 10th time or the 11th time or the first one, but let's just get it going. And so that's what we really encourage them to do. And
I think that's such great advice to songwriters, to expect that you're going to write some bad stuff, And if you don't get through that, if you don't get through those bad ones, you're not going to get to the good ones.
Yeah. I mean, think about guys like Prince or ladies like Carole King or Joanne Baez, James Taylor, the Beatles, Paul and John Lennon, Paul McCartney, John Lennon, Stevie Wonder. I mean, they wrote hundreds and hundreds, and over a lifetime, thousands of songs.
Yeah.
And the ones that we sing are just like one out of, 50 songs that were, bad. And then sometimes they be just totally bad albums because they were just like trying to for whatever reasons, but they just, so even they got bad stuff. And so everybody starts somewhere, and I just want to encourage people just to go for it. I always, when I was an artist on a more regular basis, there's a recording of Smokey Robinson singing the first recording, "Who's Loving You," when he was with the Miracles. And I know it's petty, man, but Smokey Robinson, he cracks on that song. And he goes, "I would never," and he cracks, and I laugh every single time, and it's like encouraging because I'm like the great, amazing Smokey Robinson who wrote "My Girl" and all kinds of hits. He cracked and sounded terrible on a recording that people can hear to this day. And then you had little Michael Jackson at 10, 11 years old, so "Who's Loving You" later on, and it was just an amazing, beautiful, classic performance.
Yeah.
But it's like even Smokey Robinson had to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I just try to not have an ego, and I try to encourage the interns. And Urban Doxology are interns now, but even as a group, as a leader of the group, I try to say like, hey, let's not have an ego, and everybody start somewhere, and it's okay.
That's great. You used an image today that, as a caution to churches who are expanding their congregational song repertoire, you said, "Don't smother it in ranch dressing."
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
That's
Talk
funny.
about what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think like sometimes people. I mean, I think we're in a space where you either have conservative, and you have kind of like progressive or liberal, however you want to categorize yourself. Let's just say let's just say progressive and conservative. A lot of time in conservative spaces, they're like, man, should we do this or what should we do? And it's just like a hesitance to go. And progressive side, you can actually go to do more diversity, but then what happens is it's like, culturally, instead of like getting in and learning the language and learning really how to do it and going through the humiliating process of education, and just like you gotta feel stupid, you can't learn anything if you have to be smart the whole time. And so what happens is that people will like hear the song and then or get the transcription. And just kind of, I call put ranch dressing over it, like just not really learn the style, not really get into it because they don't want to look stupid, But it's just like if I learn a language, people actually give you grace. If I go to France and I'm like stumbling on the words, I'm trying to like understand the words, they'll give me grace because I'm trying to make the effort. Oftentimes what happens is, as Americans, we're in a different country, and we're talking English, and people are understanding, and then we just start talking louder, and expect people to acquiesce to us. And I think that's kind of how we can sometimes do in our songwriting. Like there's a whole genre of Negro spirituals that doesn't sound like the way folks that were on plantations would sing. If you want to have an idea of somewhat what someone on plantation would sing, think about what a sorrow song would sing, and think about what the blues sounds like, and try to go in that way, And one of the things that gets in the way, oftentimes, is that people who are readers, music readers, they're terrified to use their ears. And it's like, no, music is an oral tradition, and oral, and it's a practicing tradition. So you just gotta like mimic before you learn. Most people learn how to talk before they learn how to read. And so, those are things where I say you can put rank dressing on, and if you just like insist it has to be read, it's not worth singing if it's not read, or these kind of funky values that we can have.
Yeah, that's good. That's really helpful. Well, David, it's been so great spending this time with you.
So
and
good too, man.
Appreciate it. I want to finish with 5 questions. These are 5 questions that I close each interview with.
Cool.
Which hymn or song would you say has most shaped your faith?
Oh my gosh. Shaped my faith. Man, that's a really great question. There's 2 things that come to mind. I'm not a big nature person, but I remember the first time, I like water and being on a boat. So the first time I was on a boat, and I spent the night over a boat when I was maybe 10 or 12, somewhere around that age. And I remember just seeing how great thou art on the sunset on the boat. So that song has meant a lot to me. Doing this kind of work, like God's given me a grace to do this kind of work, but doing this work is very just hard and heavy. It just is, it's just like heavy content. So there's a lot of things I don't do. Like I don't watch the news on a regular basis. There are certain kind of television shows I don't watch, to keep my soul resilient, But in the midst of doing this and trying to run the organization and doing really, really hard pioneering work, I actually have a Spotify playlist called Encourage Me in the Lord, Fred. And it's for Fred Hammond.
That's great.
It's Fred Hammond of his kind of like, man, like during the 90s, man, that brother used to like have like amazing harmonies and beats and lyrics, and it was like scripture based. Just really great, excellent music, and he just could kind of like cry out and just empathize with like how tough things are, but then how God's gonna bring you through. So when I'm just feeling a little dark or sad or overwhelmed, I just put that Encourage Me in the Lord, Fred soundtrack on.
That's great.
And it gets me through.
Well, you actually just answered, I think, my next question, which was what hymn or song do you turn to for comfort? So maybe just Fred Hammond.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say Fred Hammond. Yeah, I think that would kind of be that space. And I like a lot of music. I mean, I like a lot of different styles of music, but I think for me, music coming out of people who suffered has really just helped me in my faith journey.
What's your favorite piece of music? It doesn't have to be a hymn or a song, but it could be.
Favorite piece of music? I love Earth, Wind & Fire's Fantasy. A particular performance, live performance that they had with Philip Bailey, just goes in the rafters on his falsetto. But I love like Earth, Wind & Fire and their arrangements and how they pull things together. I love Quincy Jones' Quintessence album. That's really, really great. I love Count Basie and a lot of his big band stuff. So, and then like Bach is like just, I just love Bach. Like I think one of my most favorite melodies ever that I just think is brilliant, and I just like, how did he think of this? Is the Aaron G melody? We hold that melody out forever. You can't hold out any longer. And it's like, where's this gonna go? And then just how it gets to, I just love it. I think it's brilliant. So, man. So I think those are, I love James Taylor. Like some 60s songwriter. Yeah, so it's
that's great. That's quite the range there. That's wonderful. What book other than the Bible has most shaped your faith or influenced your vocation?
That's good. Oh, wow. So, Frederick Douglass saved me in 2 ways. His autobiography. He wrote 4 autobiographies. I think it's his first autobiography. It was the one, the Life and Narrative. I was not a good student from 1st grade to 11th grade. I think the environment just wasn't. I think I was probably bored, really being social. And my mom was a teacher, and so she was like, "David, could you stop embarrassing me? I'm a teacher, man." But I just, probably if I was homeschooled or went to like a magnet school or something like that, I probably would have did much better. But in 11th grade, I remember taking African American literature class because I was like, I'm black and I can read, so it's gonna be easy. I read Frederick Douglass' autobiography, the particular section where the mistress was teaching them how to read, and the slave master came in and found out and said, don't teach a slave how to read because he won't be a good slave anymore. And Frederick Douglass realized that he needed to, that was key to his freedom. And so he would trick, the kids on the plantation, the children of the, owners on the plantation on the read, said, hey, I bet you I know how to spell this word. It's like, nope, shoot, and he's like, this is how you spell it. And, or he would just take pieces of paper and try to figure out what it was out the trash can, and the way that he ended up escaping from slavery was he wrote himself a note saying that he was supposed to go to so-and-so, and they didn't think that he could read as an enslaved individual. And so that's how he ended up walking to his own freedom and escaped. And when I read that, man, it just really clicked to me that like so many people bled and died so that I could be educated. And I realized shortly after I started reading everything about Frederick Douglass and Black history and stuff, and it helped me to realize the narrative that African Americans been told in school is like black people were slaves, like not that Africa's in Egypt and that the birth of civilization is there and all of this stuff that I ended up learning later on. But it's like, you're a slave, Lincoln set you free, Martin Luther King had a dream. I didn't even have Barack Obama when I was growing up, so it was just like, that's a horrible story to look in the past. But then when I saw the story of Frederick Douglass, like that like saved my intellectual life and it gave me rebirth. So when you walk into my house, the first picture you see is a picture of Frederick Douglass that a friend of mine painted for me. And then Frederick Douglass saved my spiritual life. And so there's this like quote that I keep from Frederick Douglass. This is an essay about comparing the religion of this land and the religion of the Bible. It says, what I've said respecting and against religion, I mean strictly to apply to the slaveholding religion of this land, and with no possible reference to Christianity proper. For between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference, so wide that to receive the one as good, pure, and holy is a necessity to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked. To be the friend of the one is of necessity to be the enemy of the other. I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slaveholding, women whipping, cradle plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land. Indeed, I can see no reason but the most deceitful one for calling the religion of this land Christianity. And that text saved my spiritual life. Yeah.
Wow, thank you.
Yes.
Which hymn or song would you like to have sung at your funeral?
So I'm a producer, so it's like not about a song. I've always felt like it's like I would love it for it to be a kind of multicultural expression, when I use the word liturgy, but kind of thematic. I would have Urban Doxology put the theme together, almost have it like a show. Have some good friends, have some words, that could be shared. Produce it in a way that, like, if I would have put together a show, people would do that, and they take for a few different traditions, and I think I would love to get a song from Urban Doxology. I don't know which one, but I think because every year they write new songs, and the interns write songs. So I'm like, oh, that's a new favorite, or I love this, and if it was today, there's a song off the Portisgate album that my friend Paul Zach wrote called Your Labor's Not in Vain.
Oh, I know that song, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And I love it when Urban Doxology sings it. I like when Paul sings it, but I think Paul likes it when Urban Doxology sings it too. But So for me, songs matter, but I think songs matter in context, and so it's almost a question about like context, and I love to just like people to put together a really moving experience. Yeah.
Well, David, it's been just a joy getting to spend this time with you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man. It's good. Appreciate it. That's fun.
Voices United, a Congregational Song podcast, is produced by Benjamin Brody with support from the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada and Whitworth University. Special thanks to the Center for Congregational Song for publicity and technical expertise and Whitworth University student Taylor Heath for editing and production.